Beyond the Forecast with Grant Tosterud. The science of weather in New Mexico. What makes the land of enchantment so unique? To understand, let's go Beyond the Forecast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Forecast, where we get to dive deep into the science of New Mexico's weather. I'm Chief Meteorologist Grant Tosterud, joined today with meteorologist Josh Redwine. Josh, welcome to the show again.
Thank you.
Today's an exciting episode because we're doing something a little bit different. Usually we've been focusing on big weather topics like lightning or tornadoes or anything like that, but this time we're focusing on one specific event, one event that many of us weren't even alive for. This is the year 1941, the wettest year in New Mexico's recorded history. Now, a lot of us can think of a time in our lifetime where we've had some very heavy rain here in New Mexico. You know, whether that's at your backyard or you're out and about and it rains heavily, or we hear about flash flooding all the time, especially during the monsoon. But this is a year where almost every single month had above average precipitation, almost all of New Mexico too. And on average, New Mexico sees about 14 inches of rainfall over the whole state. There's going to be some places that get a lot less rainfall than that. There's going to be other places that get a lot more rainfall than that. But this year, on average, remember, New Mexico sees about 14 inches of rainfall. 1941 saw 26.25 inches of rain. This is over a foot of rainfall above average. And this isn't just a small number, Josh. This really stands out.
Yeah, absolutely. It was so impressive. I mean, you can only dream of a year like that, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, you can see the overall trend here, too, that 1941 year stands out above the rest. It's very normal in New Mexico to get years that are very wet and to get years that are very dry and to go back and forth between those two. It's always kind of this story of haves and have-nots. But when you look back at 1941, it's not an error, even though it looks like it. This is a year that truly had more rainfall than any other year by far. And it had a lot of impacts, too.
Yeah, absolutely. So the anomaly really affected the entire state as a whole, with some of those regions reaching upwards of 300% of their normal of what they see throughout the year. And then the most significant anomalies were typically across eastern portions of the state of New Mexico out towards western Texas, and then western Arizona as well. And then it really brought in some of the wettest weather in all of our different climate divisions across the state. So we really saw every single area pretty much in that top percentile, which was so impressive just because, like, typically, like, as we've seen these past several years, we're kind of on the opposite end of that spectrum. And so it's just so impressive to see this anomaly that is out there. And so the two wettest months that we did see throughout the year of 1941 were May and September. And they saw the largest amount of precipitation between the 2 months. And 9 out of the 12 months of that year were actually above average or well above average in many areas. So once again, 9 out of the 12 months were anonymously wet, and they were about 3 months, March, May, and September, where the maximum precipitation values for all of the water years from 1931 up until 2012. And then November of that month, or that year rather, was the only month that was actually below average. And then April, or August rather, and December were also very close to average. But as you can see there, substantial amounts of rainfall. You can see on the graph there, May and September really standing out amongst the rest of the months of the year. And so during that year, March got 2.2 inches of rainfall, which is well above the average, where we typically see about 1.47 inches of rainfall. And then in May, we saw 3.71 inches across the state, which is significantly higher than any other year, where we typically see during the month of May of around 2.66 inches. And then in September, we got 5.48 inches, which is almost 4 inches above the average for that time of year.
It's amazing. And there's this cool artifact too here. This is from September 28th, 1941. It's a document. It's a picture of one of the documents that they used back in the day to record the daily weather observations. So you could see They took them every hour on the hour in the morning and in the afternoon, showing what the temperature was. You can see the amount of precipitation there too, as it added up throughout the entire day. There's a whole category there that you could see, you know, a 0.01 to a trace to over 1/10 of an inch of rain falling within an hour. And over 1/2 an inch of rain fell this day, which may not sound like a lot, but remember, we're already talking over halfway through an anomalously wet year already. So you could see there in that red box that it says over 1/2 an inch of rain, 0.56 inches fell on this one day back in September 28th, 1941. And I think it's so cool that we still have documentation of this, that you could see the hour by hour breakdown. You know, back then they didn't have these computers to track all of these things. You had to go out there and physically take these measurements. And I think it's really cool that we have an artifact like this to really document this spectacular year of rainfall in New Mexico.
In Albuquerque, precipitation in calendar year of 1941 was in the 99th percentile of the instrumental record.
So we almost doubled the average number of wetting rainfall days here in Albuquerque that year, which is, it's crazy to think about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So 1941, a historical year when it comes to the amount of rainfall in New Mexico. And we've actually gone back and looked at this research that the Weather Service has done, and they tried to figure out, you know, what caused this kind of phenomenon to happen here in New Mexico, and could it happen again? So when we come back after this break, we're going to go down into some of the climate factors, some of the weather patterns they had in 1941, and try and figure out what may have caused this and if it could happen again. So we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Beyond the Forecast, where we dive into the science of New Mexico's weather. And today we're talking about the year 1941, because this year really stands out in terms of rainfall and precipitation in New Mexico. It was a record-setting year for the state.
Exactly. It was amazing to see the history that we've learned from 1941. And what we're going to talk about in this section is what impacted, what caused this very astronomical wet year across the state.
So when we look back at 1941, we look back at some of the different climate patterns that we had during that year, over the course of the year. That year had a strong El Nino, meaning we had unusually warm sea surface temperatures out in the Eastern Pacific, and it had the highest recorded PDO on record. PDO is the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. It had an index of almost 2 degrees above average. It's that highlighted area right there. You could see it is one of the strongest PDOs on record, with this graph going up to about 2012. But even since then, we haven't had a PDO this strong. That PDO is a long-term recurring pattern of ocean atmospheric climate variability in the North Pacific Ocean. That might sound like a lot, but stick with me here. It's similar to El Nino, meaning we're looking at the sea surface temperatures, but it has a more decadal timescale. That's the D in the PDO, meaning we're looking at it in about 10 to 20, even 30-year time spans, as opposed to 1 to 2 year variability. So it involves shifts in ocean current temperature anomalies. Specifically, is it a warm or is it a cool phase? Just like how we track ENSO or El Nino. And it can have significant impacts on the weather and the overall climate in North America. Then the other impact we look at too
is El Nino. And so during 1941, the El Nino was so strong, that event, it was even a top 10 El Nino event of the 20th century. So the entire 100-year period, it was the top 10% there. And so that's based off of the strength and the duration of the El Nino period. And then...
Yeah, so this is, again, another graphic here showing the top 10 strongest on record. It wasn't the strongest on record, but it is in that top 10 category there. These are all plotted on this graph, again, up until about the year 2000. But again, I've checked back in recent history, and it still falls within one of those top 10 categories. So, you know, these are two factors that we look at to see how that weather pattern might have shifted enough to bring us more active weather. And, you know, those are big climate patterns, but you can also look back and see, you know, did other big weather events impact the amount of precipitation in New Mexico?
Absolutely. And as we look back, we do see that there was the potential that we could have had some tropical storm development, and that really just moved itself into the state of New Mexico. Now, we're not completely out of the cards in terms of seeing tropical development impacts from tropical storms. But this year alone, we can look back and see that there was potentially 3 major tropical developments that did move into New Mexico.
Yeah, we never, like you said, we don't get hurricanes, we don't get tropical storms. We get those remnants, all that moisture from those storm systems that get drawn up, especially during the monsoon. That's the time that's most famous for getting some of these remnants up that can often bring us some of our biggest rainstorms in New Mexico. And like Josh said, there's historical evidence that suggests that we may have seen as much as 3 tropical storms in September alone that could have contributed to the higher rainfall amounts across New Mexico and even across the southwestern United States. One more thing we can look at too, the overall atmospheric pattern. We can look at high pressure and low pressure. Now, of course, back in the 40s, we didn't have the satellite technology that we had today, but there are computer programs out there that can go in and kind of reconstruct on average what those months may have looked like. So, they went and did that, and they looked at this reanalysis data that indicates that we had multiple upper level troughs and high pressure systems bring moisture into New Mexico, leading to significant rainfall events in May and September. So what we mean by that, you have multiple upper level troughs. That means we have multiple low pressure systems moving in, multiple storm systems moving into the state that bring in that moisture. It draws it up. So what we're looking at here are those 4 major kind of storm systems during May and September back in 1941. At the top left-hand side of your screen, that blue area shows one of those low-pressure systems moving down over northern Mexico, parts of Arizona and New Mexico. And when you get those low-pressure systems to move overhead, often results in heavier rainfall. And that was for an average period during the month of May. In fact, the beginning part of May. On the right-hand side of your screen there, we're looking at May again. You have these large areas of high pressure building over the Great Lakes and up near Washington and off the Pacific coast. But then you again have that little blue area. To me, that looks like a monsoon pattern. You're drawing up this monsoon moisture from the Pacific, from the Gulf of California, from the Baja, up here into New Mexico, bringing us enhanced rainfall. This is an example of the surface weather map from one specific day, September 23rd, 1941, showing this overall weather pattern. You could see the word low written out in southwest New Mexico. You got your center of low pressure there, the big storm system. This is a surface map, so we're looking at surface cold fronts, surface fronts in general, pressure at the surface, and then some current observations. And you can see to the east of that word low, a cold front that's sweeping across the state. We would call this a Pacific front since it's moving in from the west. And you can also see potentially a hurricane there down in the Gulf off of the Texas coast that would also be drawing up some moisture in that dark shaded area across the eastern half of the state is what they would use to denote heavy rainfall here in the state. So it's really cool too that again, 1941, this is a long time ago, that they were able to draw these surface observations and show us what one of these days could have looked like potentially. Now they also went back and showed some evidence that, May and September, some of the wettest months during 1941, had different moisture sources and storm tracks too. Yeah. Go ahead.
In May of 1941, we can really see that there was a swath of above average, of above normal moisture, really stretching from northern portions of Mexico there, all the way into eastern New Mexico, western Texas, all the way up into the northern plains, while much of the eastern portions of the state, as you can see there, under that the yellows and oranges and reds, much drier conditions across that part of the country. So we were really lucked out at that time of year and saw all of that moisture just sitting right along New Mexico and pushing in all of that moisture for us across the state.
Definitely. And then we can look here is that this is geopotential height. So this basically tells you where you have high pressure and lower pressure. This is back in September. It's now showing us that we have this massive trough or massive low pressure system across the western half of the United States, while you have higher pressure in the eastern half of the United States. So as a meteorologist, we look at this and we know what the overall wind pattern is going to look like. And this tells us that you had that low pressure system over the northwestern part of the country drawing up the moisture here into New Mexico, along with that high pressure system that's centered out over the northeastern part of the country to bring in this almost monsoon-like pattern, along with potentially tropical moisture into the state, bringing us very heavy rainfall during the month of September. So what we're comparing here is we're looking at May and September now. We looked at the general weather pattern for May. We've now just looked at the general weather pattern for September. And this tells us that it was not the overall same weather pattern over the course of 1941, that you had these extreme precipitation events from multiple different kinds of weather patterns here in New Mexico rather than just one single atmospheric phenomenon. So it's more likely that 1941 was a coincidence rather than, having this overall weather pattern that just continued to bring in all of this moisture all year long. Instead, you just had a series of very fortunate events to bring us all this rain in one year. And it's amazing you can go back to so many years and break this down and try and figure out what happened in this anomalously wet year. And like we said, all of this rain is obviously going to have some kind of legacy and impact on the people of New Mexico. And they actually recorded some stories from people, and we have some recorded events of what's happened that year. So when we return, we'll show you what some people who lived through this had to say. Stay with us. Welcome back again to Beyond the Forecast, where we're talking about the year 1941, the wettest year on record here in New Mexico. We talked about, it was a series of fortunate events over the course of the year that led to some extremely heavy rainfall across the state. In fact, we picked up over a foot above average across New Mexico, over 26 inches on average across the entire state, which is unheard of. No other year has come close to this. And that amount of rainfall is going to have its impacts.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can imagine, flooding, damages like that were a major concern throughout that year. And so we did see a lot of flooding throughout the year of 1941. So the excessive rainfall led to significant flooding, resulting in 28 weather-related deaths. 24 of those were due to flooding. And then property damage exceeding $3.5 million at the time, which is approximately today $55 million.
Yeah, it's a lot.
That is crazy to think about, and let alone those 28 weather-related deaths. So you can see that such powerful rainfall. You don't think about it's just raining outside in terms of something that's dangerous, or most people don't. But flooding is one of the largest factors in terms of the weather-related deaths in the country.
Very dangerous.
And that's to this day as well.
Yep.
And then also we saw reservoir levels. They were exceedingly high. Elephant Butte Reservoir reached full capacity for the first time, highlighting the extent of that precipitation.
And Elephant Butte hasn't been full, by the way, since it was built. And if you've ever been out to the Butte lately, you know how low those levels are. So could you imagine it being full? The only two times in its history were full were when it was built and in 1941. Amazing.
Incredible.
Yeah.
But then also we saw on the other end of the spectrum, snowfall.
Yeah.
We saw some very, very high amounts of snowfall. A ranch in San Miguel County, they reported the greatest amount of snowfall with 203.6 inches.
It's wild.
While Cloudcroft's southern portions of the state saw 106.7 inches. And so typically they see around 70 inches per year.
Yeah.
So 36 inches greater than what they typically see across the southern portions of our region.
In southern New Mexico.
Yeah. And so that just tells you what amounts of snowfall we saw across the northern portions of the state.
Yeah,
So
pretty amazing. They also shared in this research that they had a visitor come to the National Weather Service, Albuquerque, who had lived during 1941 and this experience, and he shared his description of what that year was like, and I want to read it because it's just incredible. He said, as a 10-year-old, he was lucky to be able to spend the summer of 1941 on a ranch down in the Sacramento Mountains in Lincoln County. The ranch house was 9 miles from the nearest paved road. Their south fence was the Lincoln County line. Across the fence was Otero County and the beautiful Mescalero Apache Reservation, beautiful part of the state. Snow and rain had been good all winter and spring, and the summer monsoon brought spectacular thunderstorms, he says. All plants were growing and blooming in splendid fashion, is the word he says, including the cacti. Stock tanks with dirt dams were overflowing so they could go swimming if we accepted the cold water and the floating cow chips, he says. Grass was so tall in some meadow areas that they couldn't even see the face of calves when they were standing. That's how tall the grass was. Deep mud meant that the ranch pickup could not get into town for weeks at a time. and 2 bad-tempered old Jersey cows, I love this, provided milk and cream so they could make ice cream with hail from the tin roof. It was the only available source of ice on their ranch, he says, with no electricity. He said it was a sensational time in a gorgeous place. Their nearest town was more than one house, or their nearest town with more than one house was at the time, the tiny village of Mescalero. It was a village of Whitetail on the Mescalero Apache Reservation, about 8 miles away. He understands that Whitetail holds the all-time New Mexico record for total precipitation in 1 year. He says it's something incredible, like 60 inches in that year of 1941. The National Weather Service went back. They confirmed the highest observed annual precipitation total for anywhere in New Mexico is in Whitetail, 62.45 inches in 1941. I love hearing someone's firsthand report of what this year was like.
Exactly. And I mean, to remember that at 10 years old, now to think back and be like, that was a record-setting year. And just to experience that would have been so cool.
You can't just tie it to one overall weather event. It was multiple different types of weather and climate events back to back that just led to the perfect storm, pun intended.
Exactly.
Yeah. And if you want to read more up on this year too, you can go to the National Weather Service Albuquerque, where we took a lot of this information from. They did all this research. Thank you so much to them for doing this because it's so fascinating. But if you want to go and read their article, you can go to their website, weather.gov/ABQ. Click on local programs, then local studies and features, and you'll find this article there. Any parting thoughts, Josh?
I just wish I was alive to see it.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully we can continue to see some wetter years like that, but without all the flooding. Yeah. That would be ideal. Well, remember that you can always stay up to date on the weather by watching KRQE, Kirky Now, or by going to krqe.com. You can find us both on social media. Until then, we'll see you later.